Three, two, one, here we go. Hi everyone, Angela Fair here. Yes, there I am. I'm just gonna ramble for a minute, as you know, so I can make sure that you're hearing me. And I'll keep an eye on the chat. In the meantime, I wanna just say hi. I'm seeing people checking in from all over the world, so good evening to those of you in Europe. Trying to think, Australia, I think I'll see you guys in the afternoon session since I think it's still night there. Good afternoon to those of you who are watching this over your lunch. And here I am enjoying a beautiful morning in northern British Columbia. I'm excited and delighted to be wrapping up this session, this 3-day splash course in watercolor. I'm delighted because you've stuck with me through the whole series. It's not a big series, and it really is just a splash course. We're just getting our feet wet. And if you're getting your feet wet when you're painting, you're doing it wrong. But here we are. We're going to talk today about this process of development, creating conditions for success. And I have to say, I was looking at the chat as we were getting started, and Mary, your comment from your grandchild telling you, he says, "Grandma, I like how my brain feels when I paint." And that's why we're here, because we want to, we've had that feeling, that good feeling in our brains when we paint. And I'm sure there's chemicals, dopamine and serotonin and all of those fancy chemical words that actually are happening when we're painting. There's lots of research out there that talks about how good creativity is for your mental health. And I think we've all seen studies and heard about that. And how they are working to, encourage creativity among people with Alzheimer's and dementia and stuff like that. My grandma actually, she passed away at Christmas, and she was just about 99 years old and started painting in retirement. And it was so much fun to share that with her. She was the one who gave me my very first experiment with oil paints. Was one of the one and only times I painted in oils. And we loved talking about creativity and art. And even when, dementia set in and there wasn't, she didn't have a lot left in terms of her memory, and yet that creativity connection was still there, and she was fascinated every day with the beauty of the outside world that she could see from her window. And we could talk about that, and music as well. All of those creative disciplines have this incredible power. And I want to talk about that incredible power. And I think it's really interesting when you, if I tell you my story of being an artist, it sounds a lot like many other artists' stories. Most of the time, so often, when giving an artist's biography, we start with the boring old, I've been painting and drawing ever since I was a child. And it so often comes back to that. We start life with this innate drive to create. And we don't do it because we're looking for praise. A little child will come to you with their painting and they're so proud of what they've done, and often quite offended if you don't recognize what it is. And so they're coming to you already proud. They're not coming to you looking for your approval so much. And somewhere along the line, I often see it around middle school, they start to get self-critical and they start to depend more on those externals. And often we get away from feeling that same joy of creativity. Some conditions creep in which make it harder to be just unabashedly creative. And so we want to talk about that. Thank you so much for your wishes on the passing of my grandma. That's so sweet. We so value her legacy in our lives, and the almost 99 years we got to have her as part of our family. And I'm so, it's really special when your kids get to know your grandparents. Okay, so we're going to talk about staying creative when you're during this whole learning process today. We're going to talk about creating conditions for success. Yesterday we talked about making mistakes, and that's not really a fun thing to talk about, the idea that some paintings are failures. And I think it's harder now, even because we live in this age where so much of what we do we share publicly. We put it on Facebook or Instagram. Social media has this connection to our lifestyle, and we're still figuring out how that all works. We know in our brains that the curated stuff we see on social media is only a small part of the picture. You know, that perfect mom and her perfect kids and her spotless house. That doesn't mean she doesn't have a bad day once in a while. And yet, when it comes to art, so often we feel like if we can't share it on social media, well, it's a failure, and we have to feel bad about it. And no one else is making mistakes because we see all their beautiful product on social media. So we really have to fight that and recognize that when mistakes happen, they're not judgment on who we are as artists. We need mistakes in order to learn problem solving. And this is really powerful for life because as creatives, we get to be better at problem solving. And I think it helps us see the world in a more positive way. When we reframe all of our paintings and our art as learning opportunities, that colors our experience in the world as well. And we can see that flip side of, you know what, I'm struggling in this part of my life right now, but I'm going to come through it a more compassionate person. I'm going to use this to make me stronger. And we do that in art. I'm struggling with this painting right now. I'm going to use it to help me learn. And that mindset, it's just transformational. It really is. And so that's why I'm here to teach you. And that's why I love sharing this message, because it changed my life to be able to paint and look at the world in this way. It has helped me to feel more intentional and experience the world just a little bit deeper. I paint, one of the reasons I paint when I'm painting my memories. The landscapes you see behind me here, we'll go this way. This tree right here is a painting that from a reference photo that I took on an outing with friends. They were moving away, and one of the last things we did was we went hiking together. And they had little toddlers, and they were stumbling down the hill, and it was just a really special day. And actually, that painting is actually the same scene. I've painted that reference photo so many times. And then the pink sky. My camera's reversing, so I have to point backwards to what I think. That pink sky there is my home. This is where I live. Sky's not usually pink like that, but that color choice and the movement that I created was sharing my feelings for the farmland that I see and the way I feel when I'm out in my world. Yeah, and I love your comments in the chat here. I need to actually minimize it so I'm not distracted from my notes and wanting to visit with you all. We'll get back to that. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat. Nina is here again. She is moderating, so she can answer some of your questions, and anything she's not sure of, she posts in that document for me to read through at the end of the lesson. We are talking about freedom and fearlessness today. And I think this is an attitude you should be able to have and maintain through your entire watercolor journey. It's also the other goal, I think, is freedom, fearlessness, and something else, and I've forgotten what it was. So we're going to just go on to the rest of my notes, and then I'll remember in a few minutes. We learn the basic techniques, which we've looked at very briefly here. More in depth, if you want to go more in depth with those techniques and really see them used in a much more intentional painting situation, I have so many classes and lessons for you at learn.angelafair.com. Take a look. Pick the one that feels right. You can go with your gut there, and let me know what you think. Again, I said it yesterday, failure is not a verdict on your ability to as an artist, and it is not a judgment or a limitation on your right to paint. If you can put paint on paper, you are a painter. And that is just how it works. It's a physical action of putting paint on paper. And one thing that I do that really helps me when I start to feel like my skills don't measure up is I look at some really crazy abstract art. Some of the really modern art out there is so simplified and it's not about, the abstract art is so often about expression and not about showing off some technical prowess. And to me, that helps me find a balance, because if somebody out there is painting something that's that simplified, that raw, I don't have to feel ashamed of what I'm doing. want to encourage you. I'm in this position as a teacher who fails. I do overwork paintings. I repeat the same mistakes far longer than I would like to. And I feel often like the slowest learner in the world. So I determined long ago that if I couldn't be fast and efficient at learning this stuff, then I would at least be the most stubborn. I made a choice, and I remember being 17 years old and looking at my painting, and I had this big painting, and I had one brush stroke that I was extremely proud of. And that one brush stroke, nobody else noticed it. Nobody else would have, paid attention to it. But that was the brush stroke that I knew was like a true artist's brush mark. And it propelled me to the next painting. It helped me to stay encouraged. And number one is I've made painting my guilt-free, happy place, even when nothing's turning out. I'm going to just pop my notes up here so we can look at them together. Just bear with me. There we go, halfway there. Okay, so again, ask questions freely during the broadcast. I will answer as many as I can during the end. During the end. Okay, we're going to create conditions for success, things that help us be those stubborn learners who keep going. And I want you to ask yourself, is your mind a safe place for creativity to happen? I was reading a book on leadership, talking about corporate culture, and it was talking about how in a work environment, if you're managing people, you need to make sure, if you want them to be creative, if you want them to have innovative ideas, you really need to foster this safe environment for them. If they feel like they're going to be belittled or not listened to or diminished in some way for the bad ideas, they're not going to be bringing you their good ideas either. And I think that's really powerful if we think of our brain as being that, or our heart maybe as being that underling who wants to bring an idea out, and yet isn't, if our brain is saying, that's a terrible idea, you're such a bad artist, you can't do this, negative self-talk, we're not going to feel free to be creative. And I think we're so critical of what we're doing, and we have high expectations. As grown-ups, we often we don't like being out of our comfort zone. So we often kind of stick with things we're good at. And so to move to watercolor and recognize that we're pretty raw sometimes, we're pretty clumsy and awkward in how we handle the medium. And we don't always get out what we want to say. And we can be really down on ourselves for that. And that negative self-talk doesn't make your creativity feel nurtured or free to flow. Another thing that's a creativity killer that can make your painting environment feel stifled and boxed in is that overdependence on outside approval. When we're worried about what other people are going to think of our art. And that actually goes along with perfectionism. And I have ego in brackets there because perfectionism is really just ego. We don't want to look bad, and we don't want to look like failures. And my husband is using a saw outside. I hope you're not picking up too much of that noise. He has been giving my kitchen a facelift. It's like the best birthday present ever. Another thing that's a creativity killer is fear. And most of the time this is fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, fear that if you open up your heart and let your creativity flow, there's just going to be this empty cobwebbed space. So we don't recognize how having those thoughts, that negative mindset, can really just kill our creativity. And then we're disappointed because our painting wasn't creative. So we want to play. We want to get back to that childlike faith that we have something beautiful to give. And we're going to talk about how to do that today. Before we do that, I also want to just talk about stages of competency. And I spelled competency wrong. That's embarrassing. Competency. We have 4 stages, and we kind of all go through them at the same, in the same order, not at the same speed necessarily, but we start out with unconscious incompetence. We don't know what we don't know. And this is the beginner who creates, maybe you went to a painting party, your first time painting in watercolor, and following the step-by-step of the instructor, you were so amazed with what you created, and it was really addictive. Unconscious incompetence is like, wow, this is so great, I'm doing so well. And and that beginner's luck, I guess. The accidental beautiful things that happen are really exciting. But when we get to conscious incompetence, this is the stage where those accidental unconscious things that were happening early on, now we're trying to do them intentionally. And this is where we start to realize how far we have to go. And I've put those words in bold because this is the place where a lot of us get stuck and a lot of us give up. Now, the deal is the list doesn't stop at number 2. If you press on, you get to see the results of your persistence, that being the most stubborn artist. Come on, we're all stubborn. You can be the most stubborn artist you know. So pushing on through conscious incompetence, knowing that you don't know a lot of stuff, and not giving up, we get to that stage of conscious competence. We have competence, we have skill in the medium, we can make watercolor do, for the most part, what we want it to do intentionally. But it takes a lot of our brain. You know, we have to work hard at that. And then you get to be, I think this is where I am. It's gotten to feel a lot easier over the years, the stage of unconscious competence, where the skills have been internalized. Watercolor feels so much more natural, and then you get to do whatever you want. And that's, well, within reason. Anyhow, it's pretty fun to be in that place. And it might take some time. I can't promise you how long it will take. I can't say this is a 6-week fix and we'll get there. We have this culture, this environment that we've created where people like quick fixes. So we've got 6-week diet plans and 30-day, workouts, and 30 days to a new you. And it takes 10,000 hours to become a master of something. Somebody said that, and I don't think there's even a study to actually prove it. From what I hear, the research is pretty dubious on that. And yet we repeat it, we say it all over the place. There's another one that talks about how many days it takes to build a habit. And now there's new research that says, well, actually it takes longer if you really want it to be natural. And notice that none of the books say 5 years to a brand new you. It's always a short time period. And I can't guarantee you that, but I do want to suggest and ask you, consider that if it is going to take a long time, if I haven't reached the peak and the pinnacle yet, let's make it really fun to get there. Let's make that the priority rather than trying to get to some finish line that just keeps moving. And so that's where we're at. So what do we do? What do we do in the process of trying to go from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence? And I think it's actually really simple. And the number one thing to do is just to paint. Put on those brush miles. The more you use the tools, the stronger your skills become. We keep it simple. We focus on one thing at a time. Don't be overwhelmed by all the things you need to know. Think about focusing on one area. Well, I feel like my values are weak, or I have no idea how to mix colors, and take that as your ownership. I spent a whole year just painting trees. That's why they're now my favorite thing to paint. It wasn't the only thing I painted during that year, but during that year I was intentional about studying trees, thinking about painting trees, and then actually going and painting trees. And I learned a lot in that time period. And then recognize also that you have to grow into knowledge. And I'm going to actually switch my screen so I can give you a little physical demonstration here. There we go. Okay, growing into knowledge. When I teach a workshop, I have students usually from all kind of skill levels. Most of the time they've gone past the unconscious incompetence, not knowing what they don't know, but they're definitely working to build skill in mastering the techniques of watercolor. And when I teach, I have to recognize that I'm giving you a volume of information. Some of it is going to fly right over your head, right off the camera, out of the screen. It's not gonna make sense. You might not even hear it because your brain isn't ready to tune into that. As you grow your skills in watercolor and you get a little taller, that information is going to start hitting you right here. Actually reaching your brain, soaking in, but then we also have to give that information time. And if you're actively painting and you take a workshop, you're primed to hear the stuff that's going to hit you right here. And then as you kind of absorb it during the workshop, and I would encourage you not to expect, if you're taking a watercolor workshop, Don't expect to come home with perfect paintings. Make it your guilt-free learning time so you can have some messes as you work on absorbing that volume of information. The information hits you here, but then it has to trickle down to your heart. You have to own it, heart's over here, and then it comes out your hands into onto your painting, and that's going to take time. And I love having that visual, thinking of growing it so that the information does hit you here and then comes out your fingertips. If you're taking an online workshop, you have the advantage of retaking it. Most of the time, I know as an online instructor, everything I teach online, I offer lifetime access to. And some of that might, well, anyhow, some of that might be changing as we change some of the way we do things. But if you've purchased a course from me in the past, if you do so this month, you get lifetime access. That course is yours. So as long as it's on the internet, you can come back and visit that course. And I've had some courses online now for 5 years. So students who started and took that course 5 years ago, if you take that course every year, you learn something new each time, because as you grow, the stuff that went whoosh and you didn't even notice, it wasn't even on your radar, then you become ready for it and it starts to hit you in the brain. So that's kind of how that works. And that's one reason I love online teaching, because you have that time to absorb information and then take in new information. Okay, we're going to switch over to the painting surface now. There we go. And do some work. And have a drink of water because I'm drying my throat out. So what do we do in the meantime as we're working to build our skills? What does that look like? And the good news is it can kind of look however you want it to look. So I've got some paper here, and we're going to just do a couple of different things. One thing that I do is it is important to me to make my studio a safe haven for creativity. I have my phone turned off all the time. And I thought, once upon a time, I thought I'd let my kids come and paint with me, but I actually like to work alone. It's really nice to crank the music and just make this my own space where I'm a little bit cocooned from the outside world. And if you don't have a dedicated space, don't worry about it. It's really nice for me to have this quiet space where I can shut off, things like laundry and to-do lists. But I spent many years painting in my house, surrounded by my family, and I don't think my creativity suffered that much. So when I come to the studio, though, the first thing I do is I spend some time playing. And playing for me means starting with just an open mind and a little bit of color. So I'm using a juicy brush on dry paper. This is one of my favorite ways to paint, is wet on dry. And using my Escoda Versatile, which I've mentioned previously is my favorite brush. Don't forget there's a supply list in the link below the video, in the description. And I'm just placing color on the paper and letting it flow. And I'm working with one color right now. And my goal in the studio, I would be talking less, of course, would be just to kind of observe and keep an open mind and try to relax to get into a creative zone. If I were to come into the studio and I had a serious painting I'd been working on very intently and it was going well and I wanted to work on that next stage, if I were to just start in right on that painting, I'm going to have brought in all of the cares and concerns of the day. This is phthalo turquoise with me, and I haven't let go and found my creative zone yet. And so my goal when I come to the studio is I will warm up and play with color, and it doesn't have to be a big piece of paper like this. You can work on a small one. And I spend some time warming up, and I plan to warm up for as long as it takes until I start to feel connected to what's happening on the paper. It's harder to do when I'm videoing, so I'm just I'm faking it right now. But I'm paying attention to the paint and water. Let's grab some more violet. This violet is called Ultramarine Violet, and it's really got some really nice kind of granulation. As it starts to dry, it creates a really nice granular texture. But it's not a dark violet, as you can see. It's really not as dark as my dioxazine violet can be a near black. So sometimes I might play with just 2 colors for a really long time. and just dotting color in to see where we can go with it. And making puddles and observing what those puddles do. And this is something you can do at every skill level. I've been painting 20 years. I am still making colorful puddles on my paper and learning from it. By lifting a fair bit of pigment right now, I'm trying to get a real juicy amount there. I'm going to see if I can get some more interesting flow there. Just see what it does. The other thing I can do is I can observe what happens when I try different things. I might splatter some water on my paper. And if my paper's too wet, it won't do anything because I've already got a puddle here. If I splash into that puddle, not going to make a big difference. It's like spitting into the ocean. But if I splatter on damp paper, you can see the beautiful effects that are created. You can also do that with salt, and it will sprinkle some salt on a wet wash. You may have already heard about the salt technique. And I can choose to change things up. Maybe I want to throw in a little bit of yellow. We'll spatter it on. This is my place where I'm giving my brain or my creative heart that chance to come out and play. So I want to try things, and I want to be willing to make messes. Jean Haynes has an exercise in her book. Trying to remember which one it's in. Possibly in Paint Yourself Calm, but I can't remember. Her atmospheric watercolors is probably my favorite of the books she's written, if you're looking for a book to inspire you to paint more loosely. But she talks about taking two colors that you think will make ugly effects and experiment with those. And she says, so far, no one has successfully actually made an ugly two-color wash. So there's still hope for you. And as I play and as time passes on my paper, different things change. I have a lot of fluidity happening at that early stage, but as things soak in, I can use a pointy brush. This is that Dagger Striper from Cheap Joe's Art Stuff. I've linked it up in my supply list that you can download. And it makes some really fun lines, so I can play with mark making. So now I'm learning a few things. I'm learning about color mixing and which colors play nicely together. I've learned about water imbalances. I've got puddles here, I've got splatter here, and I'm learning about mark making and what my brush is capable of doing. I can use the point of my brush, I can use the side of my brush to make wider marks. And all of this is learning, but most importantly, it's letting go of expectations so that I can just let my heart come out to play and feel safe in my studio. And you really do have to think about whether or not you're a safe person for your inner artist to paint with. If your negativity, if your fears are giving you, or mean you're telling yourself things about, questioning yourself and wondering if, saying things like, oh, that was a terrible painting, that was a miserable failure, that's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. You're not recognizing the positive. And one thing we're doing in our family, I have 3 teenagers and they tend to be pretty negative. They have a lot of complaints because they don't like not being in control of their lives all the time. And so one thing I'm trying to do with my teenagers is when they have a complaint, oh, I hate riding the school bus, I want to ask them, but what's the other side of that? I hate riding the school bus, but I'm thankful for. And I think we should do that with our painting. I made a really ugly painting, but I learned that those two colors don't work well together. But I realized that I need to practice more with that type of brush so that I can paint more confidently. And that's really helpful. One thing I want to mention, we started on dry paper here. I don't always start on dry paper. Another thing and I don't always start with this kind of exploration. Sometimes I might take, and I showed you yesterday, no, I didn't show you yesterday because It was this thing I did after we finished our morning broadcast. Let me see if I can find it here. I made a painting in between morning and lunch, and there it is. And what I did, this was a warm-up, and what I did was I took a painting, a first layer that was mostly these colors over on this side. Yeah, so it was quite a bit paler, and I just started throwing dark colors at it. And I love the way it turned out, the little wash of starry orange shapes swimming up from the darker colors. It was so much fun to play with this, and I liked the way my brain felt when I painted it. So we do different things. I add more paint to a failed painting and cover it up. And I don't know if I showed you this one yesterday either. This is one of my very favorite paintings from the past year, 6 months or so. This was originally a painting where I was demonstrating using a brown. It was a brown and a green, and it was up in this area. And I don't really like those colors together. They don't feel like me. I don't paint in a lot of earth tones, or at least not those particular earth tones, oranges and rusts and greens. And so I decided that instead of throwing that piece of paper away or even flipping it over and painting on the other side, I would throw more color at it, see if I could go cover up those colors I didn't love. And this was the result. And I was so glad I gave myself that little mini challenge, that warm up, to say, I can throw more paint at this piece of paper I'm not loving. And it really was a warm up. It was just something I was playing with that turned out really beautiful. Same thing here. I have kind of a mess. It's a lot of different things happening here. We see some maybe flowers over here, maybe leaves. It could be all kinds of things. I don't need to feel pressured to make this into a painting, but I can use it for further learning if I want to carve out some shapes using my indigo. This is practicing negative painting now on a damp surface so it stays soft. And look at how that starts to direct the painting. And when you're doing this as a beginner, I want to warn you, it's going to make messes sometimes. Because you're still learning, the number one thing you're learning as a beginning painter is how much water to use. So instead of choosing, I'm choosing kind of a velvety quantity of paint right now, but you might be working with a wetter brush and making these big puddles that create huge blooms and watermarks and wondering why you're not getting the same effect as I am. Really take the time, make your warm-up time your observation time. So you're not just throwing paint at your paper, but you're paying attention to how wet was the surface, what happened when I added more water to that, what happened when I lifted moisture off, and what was my result. And the more you do it, even when your observation skills are lacking and you're just kind of painting blindly, your mind is still working. You're still looking and observing and getting a feel for how your brush feels when it did that good thing, and how your brush felt when it did that thing that felt out of control that you didn't like. And we get to learn just by doing those skills start to feel more natural. These are our drills. These are our warm-ups. Just like my daughter plays her scales on the piano, and they're slow and awkward at first. When she doesn't always hit the right notes, especially those scales with lots of sharps and flats. But as she does it, it becomes internalized, really almost without your knowing. So give yourself that warm-up time. Again, freedom to play. The other thing you can do with your warm-up is you can use it to teach yourself how to paint a new subject. So I've just pulled up a reference photo. Where are we at for time? Oh, we got a few minutes. So I've pulled up this reference photo, and it's a fairly bland picture. Actually, it's a very overcast day out at the marsh near my home. And one thing you can't see in this picture is all the mosquitoes. So when I have a picture like this, it's not really vibrant. And so I have to choose how I'm going to paint it. And so one thing that you can do early on, because what we tend to do is we start focusing on the details and we get locked into painting everything we see. So it's a good idea to start out just by exploring that subject. I'm going to divide my paper in half. exploring that subject in a simplified way. If you're a beginner, you're gonna feel really overwhelmed by a complicated scene. So let's simplify. And one way I do that is by starting with a value study. Take one color. I don't have to think about color mixing. All I need to think about if I start with my value study is getting in the darks and the lights. So we're going to start just by painting that distant mass of trees. Make them kind of puffy. And one thing I've learned is I don't go flat black with my darkest darks. There's actually a really thin shadow as well there. And that serves as my marking point for my context for everything else. And we have some water, and then we have some sky. Let's do the sky next. We'll give this a chance to dry just a tiny bit. So we have some clouds, big clouds overhead. And because we're painting, we're basically transposing our scene into black and white. And you can actually do that. You can use software to convert your image if you want. And I should just move my picture so you can actually see it. Or you can learn how to do it in your brain with observation, paying attention, learning to pay attention to those darks and lights. This is a really helpful thing that will help you to paint any object, any subject more confidently. And playing with indigo here, I get to have a little bit of fun. I might decide I want to go a little more dramatic with my clouds here, dotting in a little more strong indigo. And this is where I get to play and find out. Spending a few minutes on a value study, I can paint this in a couple of minutes. So that means I can have some freedom. We're going to make our grass by using some dry brush, just dragging your brush lightly across the surface. And I don't like that boardwalk. It's boring to me. I don't like painting man-made objects, so I'm going to leave it out. And there I have a scene, my basic value study. And from here, I can decide if it works as a photo, as a painting, and I can develop it into a painting, or I can decide I might want to choose a new reference photo. But I just spent a few minutes learning how to see everything by value in terms of light and dark. And those light and dark contrasts make for a really powerful painting. What is not a powerful painting, I think I can demonstrate it here. There we go. What is not a powerful painting, I'm going to drip that all off, is a painting that doesn't have a lot of value contrast, where everything's kind of the same kind of grayish tone. The darkest thing here is that little edge where the paint kind of lingered and didn't rinse away. And it's the first thing your eye goes to. This has a very different feel than a painting with strong contrasts in it. And so learning how to see your reference photo and exaggerate sometimes those values. Now my sky is like really big and exciting. And learning how to see those values. And then this is an exercise in playing on wet paper. Look at how evocative just those two strong lines can be. Keeping it simple doesn't mean you're doing amateurish stuff. I'm learning more and more that when I simplify my painting, I get more to the heart of what I want to say. So even something like this can be really exciting. And I took a painting, yeah, it's here. This painting actually has some similarities to the reference photo we're doing today. I took one color for my sky, one color for my land, let everything flow and splash. Simple, two colors, two elements, sky and land, and yet this painting feels really powerful to me. So simplicity doesn't mean lack of skill, and it doesn't mean lack of impact either. In fact, it can be often the opposite. The next stage, if you're doing a value study as your warm-up, as your way of teaching yourself how to paint a new subject, just blotting so we can use the bottom half of the paper, might be working with some colors. So in that case, and I'm going to keep this really fast, you might decide to start with your gray or overcast sky. I'll put the picture back in just a second. I'm mixing my gray using ultramarine blue and burnt umber. You can see that's too gray, it's too brown actually. Gray is never just gray, it's always a warm gray or a cool gray. Brown is never just brown, it's always warm or cool because they're made up of other base colors, your primaries. That's starting to feel a little more like a gray-blue sky. And then I might dilute it a little bit. Add a little water. And then I can try out, you know, that beautiful gray bank of clouds along the top of the image. And a lot of times in landscape, you work from top to bottom. When you are sketching like this, we have that freedom to let things run together because what we're doing is we're gathering information, we're doing our research. Now we pick a green, green gold, a little bit of phthalo turquoise, and a little bit of palette dirt, just color that was sitting in my palette from previously. I kind of like that green. It's a little brighter than my reference photo. I think that'll make the scene look a little bit more compelling. I don't know, interesting. So we have distant trees. And again, this is where I'm exploring which colors work in my painting. I can also use the ultramarine blue to do my distant hills, and that green is really flowing up into the sky. Again, we're trying out colors so that when I go to paint the finished scene in a bigger version, I can paint it with more confidence. My movements, my decisions will be focused on interpretation because the decisions about value and color have been made in my sketches. I think a lot of times when we're learning, we invest so much time into a painting that we feel like we don't feel free to really take risks. So if you're doing these small sketches, this is where you can feel free. And I was using a burnt sienna mixed with my green over here to make my field color. And I think I used a little hint of yellow as well. And again, trying out the dry brush to create that feeling of grass. Things are bleeding together, and that's okay. Again, we're getting a feel for the colors that we like. My ultramarine blue is in my green. Actually, I'm not sure if I put it in my green. I think I did. It's in my grass and it's in my sky, which really helps to unify my painting using hints of that color in all my color mixing. The next stage might be just to work on developing my shapes a little bit more. Should my field be bigger, take up more of the page? Is this hill too dominant? Does it need to be paler or more subdued in color? Do I want to make the sky the focal point of the painting? In which case maybe I would drop the landscape down. So I might want to explore different alternatives for painting the scene. I want to just show this to you because this doubles as a warm-up, a way to be creative and to feel free to experiment and explore, but it also is that research that leads you to serious paintings. And if you're on a budget and you don't want to waste paper on just splashing color around with no actual result in something that you could frame, or if you really are worried about those dollars and feel like if your painting's not successful, you've wasted your money. You really haven't. It's all invested into your learning and your mental health. Your creativity is so valuable. But these little warm-ups, sketches, and studies can really help you as you go to develop a painting. That's why those two on the wall behind me, both the same reference photo, but painted very differently as I explore my options and see how many there's just a myriad of ways that you can interpret your reference photo, especially one that's meaningful to you. I'm going to just show you one more thing. Let's see here. Yeah, there it is. This is another little study from a reference photo that I took this winter. Two little studies. And you can see I'm trying out different colorways. I did a cool greeny violet, and I did a brownish violet one. And I've done this painting as well considerably larger. This one's not done yet. Using more colors that I might assume are the right ones, more the green for the trees and the blue for the background. And just again, exploring my options. And I kind of like the little ones the best. It's funny how when you have that mindset of this is just a sketch and I've got nothing to lose, you have a lot of freedom to then play and explore. And that feeling of freedom will show up on your brush. Just like I said, art is honest. Watercolor will show you what you're feeling in your painting. And so when you're feeling distracted, when you're feeling worried, and when you're feeling free and creative and in love with the medium, all of that will show up on your brush. And on your paper, let's throw in just a little bit more detail. As this has started to dry, we can come back and make further artistic decisions. It doesn't have to just be a first layer. And this is where I might be exploring different ways of painting foregrounds. I like to keep my foregrounds really simple. Otherwise your eye gets anchored to the bottom of the page. And so by keeping things simple, and I'm getting fussy, all of a sudden my marks all get really busy. So I blur some of them away. Keeping things simple hopefully helps bring the eye into the painting. I might decide I want to put more contrast along my trees. And it's going to bleed more than I want because my painting's still a little bit too wet to build up shapes that stay put. I'm going to take your questions in just a moment, so be thinking about things you want to ask. And see, I went too dark there. That was a mistake. So then I learned, well, that's now taking over the painting, but it's not too late to just try lightly lifting. Or you can use a thirsty brush, suck out the water, and then it works like a sponge. And actually that's a really good way to lift color when you need a little bit more precision, because you can use the point of the brush and you can also move things around a little bit with that in the process. I think it looks more like a hill than a bunch of trees. So that means I need to do some problem solving and thinking about how I might make those look more tree-like and less hill-like. And I might not get it right the first time. Again, 2-minute studies are a lot easier to correct than a painting you've spent 4 hours on. Okay, moving over towards your questions. We will be doing more landscape painting in the future. Just be thinking about that. And do take a look at learn.angelafair.com. I have courses that do actually demonstrate more of this and how to go from those early thumbnails to a finished painting. So keep that in mind. Okay, I'm going to look at your questions here. Nina's been capturing them so they don't just run loose. Okay, great questions, I'm sure. And I'm just going to have a drink of tea here. I've been looking up ways to keep your throat hydrated while you do a lot of talking lately. It seems apt. Okay, Joanne asks how about painting white flowers like daffodils. I have a friend, I want to get her name right. I have 2 friends named Marnie, and they both do beautiful paintings. Marnie Rose Ward, I believe. No, I'm wrong. Marnie Edge. Both of them are wonderful painters and you should look them up. But Marnie Edge does beautiful florals. And one thing I like about her florals, Birgit O'Connor does as well, actually. But I love the way they paint close-ups of white flowers without getting them muddy. It's really learning how to mix color and which colors you can use to keep that luminous effect. Usually with white flowers, you're seeing a lot of blue shadows, yellow where the sunlight hits, but painting those separately so that you don't have those 2 colors mix and make a muddy green. Judy asks about whether there's a difference in how we paint on 300-pound paper. It seems that I do not get enough color on this paper. Sometimes, I'm trying to think, sometimes my Arches seems like it's a little bit more absorbent on the 140-pound than the 300-pound. It might be a good idea just to try it out and see what results you get. Becky asks about going from a detailed painting style to a loose painting style. If you are new to watercolor and are working to master techniques, it's very hard to when I made my first online course, we'll back up a little bit. When I made my first online course, which was loose and fluid watercolor, that was my question: is can you, as a new painter, learn to paint loosely, or is it something where you have to start controlled and detailed and then, gradually as you get skill, move toward looseness? And the answer is to both of those, yes and no. I think that if loose painting is your goal, you can do it from very early on. I have a friend, actually my friend, I started out as a detailed painter and I moved toward looseness, but I have a friend who started out just doing washes, that loose wash of paint flowing down the page, no actual form shapes in her painting. She just explored how watercolor moved on the paper, and she did that. It was very zen, very meditative, and the skill that she acquired in that process is equal to what I've learned. So you can go at it from either way. As you work and gain skill in watercolor, I find it becomes easier to be creative in the interpretation. So really spending time with it and then giving yourself that time to let the paint flow and make those messes. If you're a very detailed painter, I would encourage you to start by wetting your whole page down and just throwing paint at it. By starting with wet painting, you give up all control, because as soon as you touch that brush to the wet paper, the paint starts to move. And so you force yourself to paint more loosely. Start out by forcing yourself and get really comfortable with that feeling, wet, and it will be easier to make the transition. I talked about Duralar yesterday, the acetate paper that I was using to do my little sketch. It does wipe off after I used it. I just took a damp paper towel and wiped it clean. Larry asks, living near natural beauty as you do is so different than us city dwellers who must go far to find such beauty. Have you ever painted in the city? I think we paint what we know, Larry, and I love my scenery and the rural life. And I've found when I spend time in the city, I don't know how to look for beauty there. And I think that when you live somewhere, as an artist, you train your eye to look for beauty. There's amazing cityscapes done by some very accomplished watercolor artists, but it's in learning how to see the patterns of light and as they fall in the buildings and shadow. And I think that's part of the wonderful discovery of being an artist, is that training your eye to see. Oh, Larry, you have another good question here we'll get to in a second. M. Swen says, can you share some tips on blending? I like to add darker values after the fact and lightly blend the darker value into what is already dried. Any tips to avoid lifting paint once it has dried? We usually, when we're painting in watercolor, one thing that makes it easier to layer without worrying about the color underneath lifting is working on that good paper, like I talked about in our first lesson. Working with 100% cotton paper that has a little bit of absorbency to it will help you to build up those beautiful layers, and they have that luminous quality. When I was using, I think I started out using like a Strathmore student grade paper, and it had amazing lifting. You could go right back to white, but you couldn't build up those beautiful darks. If you tried to layer a dark, a color over another color, your wet brush would move the color underneath and you could see your brush marks. And that was not ideal. So yes, working with good paper is number one there. Also recognizing that you cannot lay the paint down with a heavy hand. You need to work in thin layers. If you have a thick, almost opaque layer of paint, when it's re-wet, because there's so much pigment on the surface, it will move. But if you build up those layers slowly, you'll have less lifting as you continue to layer. Larry asks, and this is a question I'm not sure I can answer. I might have to think about this for a month or two. How much of your success is related to the approval, personal or monetary, of those near you and those who give you constant reinforcement every day? That's an amazing question. I've had amazing support from my local arts group. When I first started painting and when I joined the art gallery, we're in a small art community. And so I've always felt welcomed into that family of artists. And yet we don't see each other very often. And I don't make a lot of, financially, I don't do well in my community. I started, what happened for me to be where I am today as an instructor here online, I started out just making free videos on YouTube because I couldn't keep myself from sharing my light bulb moments. As I was learning exciting things in watercolor, I had to share them. My kids were napping. I couldn't wake them up. So I would do a little video and post it on YouTube. And that was back in, I think, 2012, 2011. And so I've always been supported by people who love me. And I think that's so helpful. I mean, when you know that someone believes in you, it's very powerful. But I think another part of it is just having that artistic mindset of if there's something I'm avoiding because I'm afraid of it when I'm painting, if there's a subject matter I'm kind of not painting, I want to paint, but I'm a little afraid to do it, that's a sign that I should go for it. And that's kind of how I live my life. Mekna asks, Angela, do you have a favorite book on watercolor from your early days of learning? Do you have any recommendations for beginners? I actually do have quite a few book recommendations. I look at the ones in my studio. I have a lot of watercolor books. I love collecting them. And I have recommendations on my Amazon shopping page. If you go to amazon.com/shop/angelfair, I will link it in the description below the video. And it is actually, I think, linked up in the supply list you can download. I do have book recommendations there. I liked books early on about, there's one called The 1 Hour Watercolorist. That one was really helpful because it was talking about when you don't have a lot of time. As a mom of 3 toddlers and really building my skill at that time, I didn't have a lot of time. So having 15 minutes to paint was actually my goal in those days. And I think painting greeting cards in watercolor, that was another one I enjoyed because it was working on those small paintings that were very skill building with that smaller investment of time. What is the best way, Amelia asks, what is the best way to practice if you want to stay away from step-by-step painting? This seems to be the only format I find to learn techniques. You're right, Amelia, there is a lot of step-by-step tutorials out there. I think a good step-by-step tutorial will tell you why you're doing the step that you're doing. You know, I really work to try to do that in my lessons when I'm teaching step-by-step, and learning step-by-step is a really good way to develop skill. But when you are ready to move on, that's when we want to start doing principle-based learning. And that's something that I share in my course, Watercolor Mastery. Enrollment for that opens on March 5th, and I'll be doing information sessions during that week of enrollment to let you know, to help you to decide if you're ready for that course. The word mastery is really intimidating. I understand that. Mastery is a mindset. It's not a destination. It's learning how to take those principles and learn to see them in your art and focus your learning in that direction. So hopefully that helps. I think it's scary for an instructor to teach principle-based learning because I can't make you learn. You know, it's like hoping your teenagers adopt your values, which is where I'm at right now in my life. You can't make them decide that it's important to take personal responsibility for something, but so you have to lead by example. And you know, you communicate as clearly as you can, and then from there it's their own decision. And it's the same way as an art instructor when you're teaching the principles that build strong paintings, the principles that help you grow as an artist. It can be really intimidating to teach because it's not some quick fix, 20 steps to this beautiful painting. You know, it's a lot more nebulous than that, I guess. But it's doable. I've seen amazing breakthroughs from my students who have gone with me through Watercolor Mastery, working to understand the principles that make strong paintings, the principles that we can use to make our watercolors better, and to develop our personal style so we can paint with fearless confidence, which is where we want to be. Sandra comments, yesterday I felt pushed beyond my limits when you began painting the flowers. I decided it's just paint and paper, and if I mess up, so what? I ended up loving what I painted. Yes, if we mess up, so what? If you've spent an hour painting, that is an hour well spent, even when the result doesn't turn out. I'm often inspired by my husband. He's a hot rod builder in his spare time. It's his hobby. He does not want to earn money building cool cars. He just does it for him. The money he invests, the time he spends, he doesn't, he does get a cool car out of the deal. That is true. But it's, to him, the fun is in the build, the fun is in the process. And I just think that's really cool. He's not feeling like, oh, now I'm good at this thing, I have to make money on it. He invests it because it's something that he loves. Judy asks, do you do your warm-ups on good Arches paper? How long do you usually warm up before starting your regular painting? I do my warm-ups on good paper, yes. I do not like changing my working method because the paint handles differently on cheaper paper than it does on the good paper. I have also found that I have a stack this tall of backsides, B-sides of paper that I can play with. Paintings that I've spoiled. I am not so good at painting that I don't have a lot of papers that can be recycled, either by adding more paint to a failed painting or by flipping it over and starting again. Yes. Linda asked about Shinhan watercolors. They're on my Amazon list, and are they okay? The Shinhan, I'm trying to remember here, there's Shinhan Premium and Shinhan Professional, and I think it's the premium ones that are a little bit better. They're an affordable brand with bright colors. I'm not sure about the studies on their light fastness, so if that's something that's important to you, you might want to do a little bit of research on that. But the price is actually, it's a very good price point. Susan asks, do you ever take notes for yourself when you do something right or wrong with your paintings or color choices? And I should have, sorry, I did skip the rest of Judy's question. I'll come back to that, Judy. Susan, I have this thing that I do when I do something right or wrong with my painting. Well, when I do something wrong especially, I have something I call knee-jerk painting, where I immediately turn around and do the opposite of whatever I did wrong. And I do a lot of reactionary kind of painting. Oh, that was too stiff, so now that painting was too tight and controlled, so now I'm going to turn around and go completely wild and try to be as loose as I can. And I really try to do that. It really helps to be in the moment, to give yourself enough time to say, okay, now I know what I did wrong. I'm going to quickly try to react against that and then at some point you're going to find the happy medium. Judy had asked also how long I usually warm up before starting my regular painting. I really try to trick myself into, we're out of time here. Oh my goodness. If I'm painting and I start with a warm up, I want the entire painting session to feel like a warm-up. So I want there to be this seamless flow from working those warm-up sketches, and again, until I get really working to get that feeling of free-flowing creativity. And usually that's like when something clicks inside and you're like, ooh, I like that. That's the free-flowing creativity happening. And then I like to just try to really smoothly transition to the next thing. I have stacks of in-progress paintings. It's not like, oh, I'm doing a warm-up, I'm doing a warm-up, I'm doing a warm-up. Now I'm going to work on this one painting that I've been working on all week. It's now, how do I take whatever twigged in that warm-up, how do I now take that, what painting can I take that learning to that it's going to serve that painting, if that makes sense. So if I had a brush stroke that was really awesome, and I'm like, I'm feeling like this master brush handler today, then I find an in-progress painting that has a need for, really amazing brush handling. If I'm working really beautifully with violet today, I'm going to find a painting that I was working on that had a lot of violet in it and do more of that. Yeah. I'm gonna quickly blaze through. If you're out of time, feel free to go eat some lunch or something. Even if it's the middle of the night, eat lunch. Larry asks, how aware should a painter be and pay attention to the movement of the brush? Brush handling is a part of my warm-up time. We didn't really do a lot of demonstrating that today, but it is learning to wield the brush. Remember that your brush is not a pencil. We tend to, when we use our pencils, use just the point of the pencil. Maybe an even better example is your brush is not a ballpoint pen. Use the side of your brush, use the point, drag it, smush it a little, don't be too violent, but really get to know the different angles and the ways you can use your brush. Make time for that in your painting process. When you feel that signature brush style happening, well, it's gonna happen if you're experimenting with how you're using the brush. And do feel free to try out different brushes. My loose goose that I use all the time, I bought it, I had it for like 5 years before I actually found a way that I really enjoyed using it. Larry asks, how do you avoid the mental trap of trying to paint reality? Most of your stuff is impressionistic and abstract, even when it can be identified as a scene. And for every one that I post that's abstracted landscape, there are probably 10 versions of that scene where I was too tight and it didn't feel like what I really wanted to say. I sketch that out. I do versions of it as many times as it takes before it feels like me. And yeah, there's quite a stack. Raina says, I once saw an artist burning sage and dancing to get focused and centered before she starts to paint. Do you have rituals to get focused? One thing I like to do, and I didn't do it today, when I'm really wanting to focus on style, is some of it is tricking yourself. Like I said, I like to think this is just a sketch. And I play music. I really enjoy having music in the studio, but not like classical music. I usually play actual pop songs and stuff, classic rock or 90s music or whatever I'm in the mood for. Folk singers, it just depends. I like music that I can dance to and music that distracts me a little bit, because personally I feel like when I'm half thinking about the music, I'm less likely to be perfectionistic about my painting. It helps me to paint a little more intuitively because I'm tricking my brain not to be like zeroed in like I don't know, overly intentional, I guess. Let's see here. I'm going to just go. I can't do all the questions. I'm sorry. You've got great questions today. Christiane wants to ask, would love to know how you characterize a successful painting versus an unsuccessful painting, particularly if there is no such thing as a mistake other than what you like or don't like. Definitely you need to be your own judge. You need to choose not to be self-critical, because otherwise you're never going to like anything you make. Recognizing that there is the intention we had for the painting and then the result, which can be a completely different thing. So we have to detach a little bit from our feelings like, oh, this didn't turn out the way I wanted, and instead be like, oh, I didn't turn out the way I wanted, but I'm pleasantly surprised. I really go by how a painting makes me feel. And I have paintings that I have held back from showing anyone for months because I'm like, I really like this painting. It makes me feel really good, but I don't think anyone else will see what I see. And it's always wonderful when you share a painting like that. When I share that, when I finally do say, oh, you know what, I don't even care. I'm going to share it anyhow. And people connect with it. That's really special. Diane asks, your paintings behind you look like they are on canvas. They are mounted on wood panel. They are watercolor paper. After I did the painting, I mounted it on a wooden panel, and you can find a video for that here on YouTube on how I do it and why. Hillary asks, those of us who took the mastery class last year, can we retake the class again? I do offer do-overs for past mastery students. If you've, I do have to cap it this year. I don't have it open to everyone, but if you've taken the course once before, you are able to take it a second time. Annette asks, is there such a thing as loosely structured as opposed to just loose abstract? Abstract loose gives me anxiety. Yes, I think there's a myriad of ways you can interpret your style, and I would encourage you to spend some time looking at many different types of watercolor paintings. Pinterest is good for this. Look at watercolor paintings by all kinds of different artists. There's some amazing painters out there doing really amazing things. They're not all just completely wild, abandoned, loose, and they're not all, or tightly detailed, and there's nothing in between. There's a huge range of what artists are able to do. And when you find your thing, it's really special to see how it fits within your comfort zone and gives you the sense of excitement. Regarding the mastery course, is the mastery course open? As in, once I pay and take the course, I have forever access. The mastery class, the way it's set up, and I do want to spend a minute talking about watercolor. Okay, I think I'm back. I'm so sorry about that. I had a software glitch, apparently. I think that you can see me again. Okay, I just wanted to talk a minute about watercolor mastery. I've talked about it several times. Please don't feel like I'm pushing you into anything, but I do have a course opening, Watercolor Mastery. Enrollment period is from March 5th to 12th, and then the course itself starts on April 12th. We are going to be, for 6 weeks, we work together. Every week there's a new set of lessons that releases, and we learn together in a collaborative community environment online. And then those who have signed up for the course will be building principles to help you develop your personal style, paint with confidence, and really have that mastery mindset. And if you purchase the course, you have lifetime access to that content. Yes. More information, it's all going to be coming out March 5th. I have a series of emails to help you really know, be confident whether or not the course is a fit for you. So sign up for that. The link is in the description below the video. Even if you're not prepared to take the course now, the principles that I share in those emails can help you just focus and be more intentional as you learn watercolor. And in addition to that, if you're a beginner in watercolor, I have so many classes at learn.angelafair.com. Those are ones you can take at your own pace. The best thing about the internet is you don't have to worry about anybody in your workshop looking over your shoulder and criticizing what you're doing. You can do it in your own time in the privacy of your home, and you can watch the lessons over again as many times as you need to. So that's one reason I love this resource that we have of online classes. I wish I'd had it when I was learning how to paint, but I really enjoy sharing with you with this wonderful community of watercolor lovers. Thank you so much for being a part of this workshop. It's really, some of you I know, you've taken my classes in the past, and I'm like, they're here, it's a beginner class, and here I have all my experienced students who are just such great supporters. I know there's a number of you here who are new, just getting into watercolor. The battle to build your skills and stay encouraged, that's what I'm all about. And I'm happy to answer your questions. Do check out my website at angelafair.com. Send me an email if you have questions that I wasn't able to answer here today. And just keep painting. Log those brush miles. Be your own best coach and biggest fan, and you will succeed. You will grow. You will master watercolor and get to those stages of competency. I'm so honored to be able to coach you along in that just a little bit. So bye for now, and I'll see you in our watercolor community, I'm sure. Remember that I'm also on Facebook at Angela Fair Watercolor Workshop. So I'd love to see what you've made during this 3-day series of watercolor classes. Bye for now.